G'day, I'm the Thorough Tank, and this is a quick reference guide to the Black Rook Hold dungeon on Mythic Keystone difficulty. This guide is designed to cover the basics of the dungeon from a tank perspective, including mobs you should pull, things you should skip, and anything else I think you might need to know in order to confidently tank for a group of strangers. Before we get started, I want to talk about the start of this dungeon. Most serious groups pushing the timers on this dungeon will skip the first 3 packs in the dungeon right the way up to the first boss. These packs don't give very much mob percentage, and the dungeon has more than enough unskippable enemies later on to make up the difference, and it's really easy to skip them. Simply have your healer use an invisibility potion and run straight through all of these all the way up to the first boss. The other 4 members of your group, including you, should run up and die just before the last doorway out of the room. Then the healer can mass resurrect you all and you can go straight onto the first boss. It is possible for all of you to use invisibility potions to get through, but that sacrifices your potion cooldown for 10 minutes and it's just not particularly optimal. However, when I tank for strangers, I generally kill the starting trash. It just makes things easier. You can't guarantee the healer will have an invisibility potion, and I'm going to show you how to do that as well. In these 3 pools, there are 3 trash mobs you need to think about: the Ghostly Counselor, the Protector, and the Retainer. The Counselor is the only one that you really need to worry about. He does 2 casts. One is just a minor magical spell which does a little bit of damage. The other is a spell called Dark Mending, which channels a massive heal all around him. You need to interrupt that immediately. When you're tanking with a strange group, it's usually a good idea to save your own interrupts for that because they might not get it. The Ghostly Protector only has one ability called Sacrifice Soul, which channels a AoE debuff on everything around him. It increases the damage he takes, but reduces the damage everything else around him takes. You don't want to stun this, because if you stun him, he'll lose the damage bonus, but everything around him will keep the damage protection, so all you do is make life more difficult for yourself. The Retainer doesn't do anything you can affect. He just puts a stacking magical debuff on everybody in the group at random. The healer can dispel this, but otherwise they just have to heal through it. The third pool is mobs you've seen before, but there's also one mini boss that will be there. The one on the path to the right, which you'll want to take, is Lady Valandis Ravencrest. She has 2 abilities. One is called Strike Down, which increases physical damage taken by 20%. The other is called Glaive Toss, which does damage to anybody nearby the primary target and does physical damage. So your group will want to spread out a little bit to make sure that not too much damage gets dealt. As you can see here, one of my group members was a little bit too close and got clipped. Apart from that, it does nothing else that you haven't seen. Just burn them all down and get ready to move on to the first boss. This boss isn't too difficult for you. There's not really much to worry about. Pull him to one side of the room on the pull. Move out of the Reap Soul when he casts it. Avoid the spinning glaives and the soul echoes that he uses on your group members. When he gets to 50% and heads to the middle of the room, help your group kill ghosts. Use any stuns or anything like that you have to make the ghosts move a little bit slower, to give your group more time to kill them. After all the ghosts are dead, the fight just returns to normal. You might need a big cooldown for the big AoE explosion that happens after the ghosts are dead, but on most key levels you won't, only on very high levels where you need a cooldown. That's all there is to that boss. It's a lot more about what your group does than what you do, but there are a few things you can do to make their life a bit easier. Coming up this hallway, you'll want to be careful of 2 things. Firstly, you can get a very nasty magical dot from these spiders. You get that 2 ways. The spiders apply the dot to you by meleeing you, and you also get it if you are standing in the swirly green patches when they die. Make sure that you reduce their melees by as much as possible, and also do not stand in the puddles left behind when they die, or their stacks will become unmanageable and your healer only has so many dispels. The second big thing to watch out for is line of sight. Now obviously this is a curving staircase, so you need to be really careful, because your healer, if they fall behind, can easily be cut off from you by green patches, and they might be out of line of sight, which can be a big problem if you've got a big stacking dot on you. Just be aware of where your healer is, and particularly where the rest of your group is in relation to you, and make sure you don't get too far above them or too aggressive. This pull up the stairs has a few dangerous mobs to take care of, so we're going to have a look at it in detail. First one to think about is the Elemental on the right here. It doesn't do much, it just bounces around, leaving behind the purple swirls on the ground. You just need to take a step to the side. It doesn't have very much health, it'll usually be the first thing to die. Next up is the Arcanist. This mob just casts an Arcane Bolt ability, which will randomly target someone in the group, gains stacking damage every time it's cast, so interrupt it as much as possible. Next up is the Soul Torn Champions. Their main ability is Bone Breaking Strike, which is a frontal stun. You just need to make sure you take a step to the side like you just saw me do there, and you'll be fine. The rest of the mobs are largely up to your group to deal with. They need to move out of the Archer's arrow barrage and stun the scouts when they cast Knife Dance, but if you have a stun, you can help them with that. In this next pack, you'll want to wait for the patrol moving up and down the hallway to be in position with the front 3 mobs. It's inefficient to kill 3 mobs by themselves, and it's not really a big deal to kill everything together. The most dangerous by far is the cat, as it jumps around, as cats tend to do. If you're a Blood Death Knight, make sure you use Control Undead on this, because it'll save a lot of time and give you a little bit of extra damage on the group, but otherwise just burn it down as quickly as you can. The other mobs in the group are the same as the ones you fought before. Stun the Scout's Knife Dance, dodge the frontal stun from the champion, and make sure your group doesn't stand in the arrow barrage from the archers. This pack isn't anything new. Arcane Elemental, Arcanist Caster, 2 archers, and a scout. No stuns in this pack, so you can spend a little bit more of your brain power focusing on helping the group deal with the other mobs. When the pack dies, run behind this pillar over here on the right. The mobs that spawn after this automatically aggro when they land, and you'll want to make sure that everybody is behind here so that they all run together in a nice neat little clump. If you're a Death Knight, don't worry so much about this because you have the wonderful ability Gorfiend's Grasp, but if you're anyone else, you'll have to make sure you do it this way. There's again nothing new in this pack, just make sure you deal with these mobs the same way you dealt with them before. The named mob, the Commander, he looks scary, but he's actually just the same as the Soul Champions. He just has a frontal stun and nothing else, just a bit more health. Once the last of that is dead, move up through this gate here, head up the stairs and get ready to fight the next pack. It's a melee mob with a stun and 2 archers. 2 things to be aware of in this hallway. Firstly, it's quite a narrow hallway, so if the archers jump to opposite sides, you can easily get caught in a crossfire with both of them at the same time. The other thing to watch out for, again because it's a narrow hallway, the stun can be pointed in a direction that can make things quite difficult for your melee. Just be careful about where you point him. If you want to get really fancy, put him up against a wall and try to dodge it from there. This boss is quite a dangerous one, and there are a couple of things that you need to be really careful of as the tank. First, when she's casting Vengeful Shear, you absolutely must have an active mitigation ability up. If you don't, she'll smack you for a big chunk of damage and you'll be left with a damage debuff that increases damage you take by 100%. Needless to say, this is really important to avoid. When her energy bar hits full, she'll hover over the balcony and start eye-beaming your group, while adds will spawn around the room. You get 2 adds, 1 caster and 1 melee mob. They work the same as the trash you've just fought. They cast and they stun. Our druid has done a cool trick here and entangling roots the mob before it could jump over the gate. You can do this with paralysis from a monk as well. All you need to do is just get line of sight over the balcony and then you won't have to deal with that mob. If you don't have this option, just tank it alongside the boss with the caster and make sure they both get cleaved down steadily. After she runs out of energy, she'll jump back down and the fight continues as before. Last ability you need to watch out for in the ground phase is Dark Rush. Just move to the side when it's cast. It'll always be cast on you and 2 others in your group. Form a straight line with the other people targeted. Move off the fire straight away. It doesn't hurt you very much, but positioning is really important. If you're in the wrong spot, someone's going to get hurt. Coming up through here after the boss, you're going to head up the stairs past the falling rocks. Up next is probably one of the most frustrating parts of the dungeon to tank. You're going to need to be really careful through here, particularly when you're with a group you don't know, because there's a lot of opportunity for people to pull extras here, and sometimes that can cause you some real problems. First up, what you're going to want to do is wait for this patrol of 2 mobs to walk past the exit to this hallway and pull them in to fight them first. The only dangerous thing about these 2 is the Wrathguard's Blade Flurry. It'll do a substantial amount of damage over a few seconds to you, and it just needs to be stunned and interrupted. The rest of the hallway here is just about managing how many of these you pull at a time and what the affixes are. This hallway is particularly annoying on sanguine weeks or bolstering weeks because these mobs all tend to die at different times, which makes things difficult for bolstering, and they can't be moved easily, which makes things difficult for sanguine. At some point after you engage them, they'll drink a potion and turn into one of 3 types. The first type, and probably the most dangerous, is the fire-breathing one, which will face a flamethrower cast in your direction, and you'll need to make sure you're pointing that away from the group, but it's really important that you step out of it as well, because it can actually do a lot of damage to you. The second is one that will turn extremely big and do a lot of melee damage and attack very quickly, while taking double damage. This is what makes it so difficult for bolstering, because they'll die much quicker than the others. The third type is probably the most annoying type. They'll just start spinning around like a shell in Mario Kart and knock everybody all over the place, making things really difficult and getting you knocked in all sorts of directions, which makes things even harder on Sanguine because you'll get knocked into the blood pools and it just turns into a right mess. There is no one magic way to make this area bearable to tank, but one thing that can help is making liberal use of things like Death Grip, knockbacks, and Sigil of Chains for a Demon Hunter to control the positioning of the mobs. It makes it much easier if they're all grouped up together because they can be DPS down evenly, and on top of that it makes things much easier for Sanguine because you'll be able to stack up all the blood in the same spot instead of filling the entire hallway with it. Last thing, make sure you try to fight these two Blade Lords separately if you can. They do a lot of damage and you really don't want to fight them at the same time. This hallway with the bats is another area that scares many inexperienced tanks. The thing to keep in mind is that the Fel Guards are the ones doing all of the damage. Now, they have two abilities. One is called Fel Frenzy, which is interruptible, just buffs their own damage. The other is called Sick Bats, which will cause every bat near that Fel Guard to be fixated for a few moments on the person that's targeted. Now, there's no way to stop this. You can stun them, but they'll just try and recast it immediately afterwards. So the way to do this hallway is actually somewhat counterintuitively, don't worry about killing the demons, kill the bats. If there are no bats alive, you don't have hardly anything to worry about. So make sure your group does as much AoE damage as possible. You want to keep the bat numbers low. If the bats do start to focus on someone and there are quite a few alive, consider using some stuns there to control them while the fixate wears off. Try to avoid pulling more than 3 demons at a time. You probably don't have enough interrupts to control all of them, and they'll start to get pretty big, and that can cause you some real danger. Once you kill the last Felspite Dominator, the bats will stop spawning, and you can just clean up what remains and move on to the boss. This hallway really isn't as difficult as it looks if you just pull carefully but steadily, and make sure your group focuses on keeping the bats under control, rather than trying to focus desperately on burning down the demons. Thrash Bite is another boss in here that can be very dangerous for tanks if you don't know what you're doing. Take special note of his energy bar. He slowly gains energy throughout the fight based on damage he does to you. The more auto attack damage you take, the faster he gains energy. When it reaches 100, he'll do a Brutal Haymaker, which is a huge tank damage ability that will smack you for an enormous amount of physical damage. You need to be watching his energy bar in this fight and be ready for that when it happens. You'll probably need a cooldown if you're doing anything remotely challenging in terms of key level or tyrannical or anything like that. The second major ability you need to be aware of as the tank is Hateful Gaze. Depending on class and key level, you can soak 2 or 3 of these in a row. You'll need to be careful once you start getting to the second and third one, as you'll have a debuff that increases the damage taken from the next one. On very high keys, this ability is going to require your group to take some of the charges. Anyone in the group, any class, can take at least one if they've got a defensive cooldown up and they're at full health. So make sure from time to time you rely on them to take one. And that allows you some time for your stacks to fall off, so you can take another 2 or 3 in a row after that. Once you've got 2 stacks or 3 stacks, you'll need your group to take 2 charges in order to give your stacks time to fall off. The reason you want to handle this as the tank is that it minimises the boss movement. When he charges at you, he doesn't go anywhere. Last up is the Bat Laser. This is one of the most chronically misunderstood mechanics in the game. You need to take the laser to the edge of the room and point it so that the laser is pointing in a straight line along the sides of the room. As you can see here, that keeps it out of the way and maximizes the amount of space you have to work with. On high tyrannical keys, this can become really important because the room will fill up very quickly, and if you don't have enough room to work with, you'll quickly find that the boss lives long past the time when you run out of space. That's it for Thrash Bite, so just make sure you minimize your ongoing damage taken to reduce his energy buildup. Make sure you intercept charges to the point where you can take as many as possible before needing your group to help you out, and make sure you drop the bat lasers on the edge of the room. Up next is the last little bit of trash before you get to the final boss. There are 12 mobs in total. The safest way to do the pull is in 3 groups of 4. So you'll grab these first 2 through here, followed by the 2 behind them. Then, once they're dead, you'll go through the hallway, pick up the 2 lots of 2 that are on the staircase. Finally, you'll run up to the top of the stairs and kill the 4 in the room. Feel free to experiment with this to your taste. If the affixes don't punish large pulls and you're confident in your ability to tank more of them, feel free to grab more. I sometimes do 2 groups of 6 rather than 3 groups of 4, and sometimes if I'm doing a low enough key, I'll even just grab the whole lot at once. It's up to you, do what you feel comfortable with, but the safest way is 3 groups of 4 to start with. There's only 2 mechanics you need to watch out for. The swordsmen do an ability called Coup de Grace, which is a large physical damage ability that will do more damage to you if you're not protected by a defensive ability. That's only for you to worry about. Then the lancers will periodically jump around the room, leaving large brown swirls, which your groups need to move out of, otherwise they'll get stunned. These apply to you as well. It's really dangerous if you get caught by a stun, because it's so long that there's every chance another lancer will jump on you while you're already stunned, and it just sets off a chain reaction that becomes very difficult to break out of. In the first phase of this boss, watch for the positioning of Latosius, the Night Elf, around the balconies on the outside of the room. He'll telegraph his laser plenty of time in advance in this phase, and you should be able to dodge it easily. Make sure you dodge the fidget spinner as it's buzzing around. It doesn't do any damage, but it knocks you around if it hits you, and that can be a little bit annoying. When he's stunned during the transition, use that time to build up some resources, whether that's rage, pain, runic power, that kind of thing. Once the Dreadlord spawns, you're going to want to use a magical damage cooldown to resist the first Shadow Bolt volley. On high tyrannical keys, it can kill you even as the tank. The next major mechanic you're going to want to dodge is the Sleepy Time clouds that he builds up over time throughout the fight. Important note for these, only the clouds that have a circle around them are active. The ones that are floating up in the air and don't have a circle won't actually sleep you. You have a lot more room to work with than you think, so make sure you don't get too paranoid about how many clouds are around the place. The last thing you need to worry about is the laser phase. Make sure you stay close to the middle of the room when you're dodging the laser. It means much less distance to travel overall. If you run around the outside of the room, you can easily find yourself in a situation where you don't actually have time to outrun the laser. If you're close to the room, you don't have to move hardly at all. That brings us to the end of this boss and to the end of the dungeon. This was a longer video than most because this is a complex dungeon with some really annoying trash. But if I missed anything, please leave a like and a comment, and hopefully I'll be able to learn something from you too. See you all next time.